Hello and welcome back to another episode of Soccer Supernova, a state of mind's dedicated football chat show. Today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the current Glasgow City manager, Scott Booth. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Always good the day after a game that we've won. If we
Put you in a good
hadn't,
one.
then you'd have got me in a different state of mind. But no, to be fair, everything has been going well. It's just been great to be back playing football again competitively. Great to see the new players that we have, integrate into our squad and to also become competitive in the games. So yeah, there's been a lot's happened, and a lot hasn't happened, if you know what I mean, because it's been quite stationary over the last year. But yeah, I think all in all, you have to try and as often as you can be positive, and we are about to be positive about where we are right now, and that's back playing competitive football.
I was just going to say, how have you found it last year? Have you felt maybe women's football wasn't treated the way it should have been, or not been given maybe perhaps the right, support in that sort of sense that it has been sort of shut off for like you say the majority of the last year?
I think initially it was fine. I think we. I'm saying that it was fine. I mean, I think initially the women's game, um, it's professional in Scotland, obviously to a point, and we were allowed to continue, and that was good because I think all the teams did everything that was asked of them to make sure that everyone was safe. And then, yeah, the longer lockdowns went on, and the more that we had, obviously then we were stopped from playing, and that was really difficult to cope with for professional football players that are being paid to play football, and ultimately were being stopped from being able to continue to do what they were paid to do under the same rules and regs as the men's professional game, which was allowed to continue. So yeah, I mean, I think that was for me that was a difficult thing to cope with, um, and I imagine for the players it was even harder. But we're kind of through that now, which is good, and we're back to playing competitively and safely. And yeah, it's always difficult, isn't it, when you're thinking about like football, but you're also thinking about people and their safety and their families. Then it always makes it more difficult to find the right pathway through all that. And I think this has been such a unique experience, with the pandemic, that everyone's learning as they go, and no one's really right and no one's really wrong because it's never really happened before in our lifetimes. So it's um, it's been hard, but I do think that we're now back on the right road, from our perspective as a professional football team, and it's great that you know we're allowed to go back and play competitively. I mean, it's been such a long time, and it's been so stop start. It's just been the weirdest time, in football, to be honest.
It has been one of the weirdest times in football, and we'll get back to your current Glasgow City days later on. But first off, we'll get right back to the beginning for you, where your football career started. Was it always the dream? Obviously, growing up in Aberdeen, was it always the dream to become a footballer?
Never really thought about it. I really didn't. I just played football. I just loved playing football, and it sounds silly really when I think back, that it was never really a case of. I think nowadays maybe because football is so, it's like it's everywhere, and with social media and even with young kids, footballers, the top leagues, I mean, it is absolutely everywhere. So I can understand now maybe a kid who's 9 or 10 saying, I want to be a football player and I want to be the best player ever or whatever it happens to be. But in my day, it was more just about playing football, going out to the football field at the top of the road and playing there where it could have been, I might have been 9 playing with 15-year-olds and, playing World Cuppy and doing stuff like that, just playing, um, with a ball and a goal if you were lucky, and maybe a couple of jerseys thrown down if you didn't have that facility. And I think it was great. It was really just about loving the game and playing football and enjoying it, and keeping yourself fit and healthy. So I never really thought about it as actually, right, I'm going to be a professional football player right up until I was probably maybe 14, 15. And I'd been involved with maybe national team programs and stuff like that at that age, but I still didn't think about being a professional football player. It just didn't really come into it until, I suppose, there was a real crossroads came when I was about almost 16, and Notts Forest asked me to go down on trial with them to get what was called an SYS. So it was like a kind of like almost like a trainee program at the time, and it offered you like 2 years, where I think the government helped to subsidise that a little bit, and that was the first time I think it really crossed my mind was, wait a minute, I've been at Aberdeen forever. I've been training with them forever, and now Notts Forest want to sign me. And I kind of came home saying, it was actually Brian Clough that was the Notts Forest manager at the time when I met him, and it was quite a big deal for me as a kind of young, naive, shy Aberdonian to go down there and do that, and then come back and say to the coaches that I'd been coached with for years, look, either you offer me a contract or I'm going to go to Notts Forest. And that's how it came about. I had to actually force their hand, which is not a great thing in football when you're a football player, when you've got to try and tell your club to sign you, otherwise you're leaving.
Some counter argument with Brian Clough, though.
Yeah, that was amazing. That was amazing. I was down there with another football player from Scotland as well, and he was from Glasgow and I was from Aberdeen, so I was shy and he was like right to the point and chatting away to Brian Clough in the room, and I was like, didn't say a word. And yeah, it was pretty surreal. They invited us to watch a Notts Forest home game, and then we got invited into his manager's office after the game, and we had our not agents there at the time, but we had people there that supported us, and yeah, it was a really weird, surreal situation, and I didn't say anything because I was pretty scared of them, to be honest.
So obviously, you do get that contract with Aberdeen instead. Maybe being a professional footballer wasn't the plan, but did you grow up being an Aberdeen fan? So when that contract came, it was just a matter of, well, even if it's Brian Clough, it's Aberdeen here. No,
absolutely. I kind of forced their hand, and I wanted to, and yeah, I grew up being a massive Aberdeen fan, and I remember living in the Bridge of Dawn, which isn't that far from Pittodrie, really. It's just kind of like along the road and then along the beach. And on the night where, when Aberdeen beat Bayern Munich at Pittodrie, I remember actually stepping outside. The game was on telly, but I remember stepping outside and hearing the fans all the way from Pittodrie to Bridge of Dawn. It was really weird. It never happened before, and we were out in the cul-de-sac, and we could hear the fans going absolutely mental. And I think that was a big thing for me, and at that time, because I'd have been maybe 12, and hearing that and being involved in it, and just seeing everyone around you that were so passionate about the club and what we achieved back then was amazing. So yeah, it was a great experience, and one that I think really did, make me want to do as well as I could in football, but just an incredible time for Aberdeen as a city and as a club.
Can you remember your debut?
I can, yeah, I can remember the debut. It was a game against St Mirren at home, and I remember it again. It's funny because I'm getting old now, so it's a long time ago, and you kind of try and remember things, and I don't have the best memory, the best of times. But what I do try and do, and what I've done is I try to remember things with like sort of significant moments. So for me, it wasn't really about a debut. The significance wasn't really about a debut in terms of playing for the first team for the first time. It was more what happened during that debut, and I remember coming on and just being so full of energy and wanting to do well, and I remember just I'd love to see it again. Actually, I've not seen it since, so I don't know if it's somewhere in archives or whatever. But basically, got to the byline. It was at Pataudry, and cut the ball back to the front post, and Charlie Nicholas, who was playing for us at the time, made a run to the front post and basically headed it in, and it was his last goal for Aberdeen. And I'd set up Charlie Nicholas's last goal for Aberdeen. I just came on for like the last 20 minutes, and that's lived with me for forever, because obviously loved him as a player. I thought he was fantastic, but also just to have a contribution in that first game. And yeah, it was a surreal moment where I've cut the ball back and Charlie comes running over at me, arms, spread out, waiting to give me a hug for his last goal for Aberdeen. So yeah, it was great.
Jumping ahead a little bit, but just as you touched on Nicholas there, obviously, he was fantastic up at Aberdeen. You obviously grew up a fan. What is it like, you're playing alongside a guy who obviously was a hero, and then you get managed as well by Willie Miller, who's probably the club's greatest ever captain. What's that like when, you have to sort of put that fans bit aside and you're working with these guys in a role?
Yeah, I mean, I think that happens with football players. It's a very surreal thing, isn't it? You want to be a football player. You maybe end up playing for a team you've supported, and then you find yourself in a dressing room with the players that you've supported. And because obviously players like Alec McLeish and Willie Miller played for the same team for such a long time, that was something that was entirely possible for a 13 or 14-year-old boy to eventually end up playing with some of the greats of the club. And that's what happened to me. I ended up sitting next to Alec McLeish, and just directly across the beady eyes of Willie Miller in the dressing room, and that was completely surreal, and definitely took my breath away to be able to do that, and it was amazing to be able to play with these guys, and I didn't think I would get that opportunity at all. Never did I think I'd get that opportunity. So yeah, I think it's one of these things that maybe today wouldn't happen as much, because for the top teams that are doing as well as Aberdeen were when I was trying to break into the the squad or join with them. I think it's a much more difficult process now for young players to be able to do that. A lot of them have to go on loan and go out to different clubs, and there's so much going on. But in my day, it was something that was achievable if you did well. And yeah, it was something that I'll definitely not forget the fact that you're in the reserve changing room for maybe almost 2 years. You're hoovering up in the first team changing room. You're cleaning their boots. You're cleaning the showers. You're doing all the jobs that you need to do. Helping out with the laundry of the first team kit and all sorts of things. And then if you do well enough within reserves and you look like you've got a chance, then you find your way into the first team changing room, which is, it's like you don't have to hoover anymore, which is a great thing. So there's a lot more positives than that, but that was one of the big ones for me.
You obviously you didn't need to hoover anymore, so you did break into that first team side, and you touched on it. It was an extremely successful side, or perhaps not successful, but an extremely dominant side, and perhaps underachieving. So it's 30 years now since that 1990-91 season. Talk us through that season, and especially obviously that final day against Rangers.
This is the thing. I wish I could remember that much more about it. I don't remember that much up until the last few weeks before we got into the showdown game. I don't know why, because it was probably one of my most productive in terms of goals and games at Aberdeen. I just remember we were on this great roll where we were winning games and winning games and winning games. We had great belief, and every game we went into, we thought we were going to win. And I think it was an incredible run into that last game against Rangers, where I don't think we've been defeated in something like 13 or 14 games. I think we only drew maybe 1 or 2. The rest we won. So we're on this great and crazy roll, and confidence was high. And then my memory comes back when I'm thinking about the build up to the actual game itself and the game. So yeah, it's a strange thing, isn't it, that I don't remember that much about the stuff before. I remember scoring a header at Pataudry. I think it maybe was the week before or the week before that. It was I think a shot came in and the goalkeeper parried, and I've gone in the front post and I've managed to head it over the goalkeeper towards the back stick. And I remember that goal quite clearly. I'm not sure who it was against, but I know that it was very close to that final game against Rangers. And then against Rangers, yeah, it's the stuff of legends now. The what happened between Jockey and Alex, who decided to play the way they did, the shape they did, the formation they did, the personnel they did. What were the reasons behind it all, and what was the fallout afterwards? To be honest, I was in the thick of it, but I don't know any more than you do probably about how that all panned out. And it's definitely been something that in my time as a player and as a coach, I would like to know exactly what went down before all that, because I think the two coaches, the two managers were so respected, both Jockey and Alex Smith, that I don't think, well, not so much. I think press and everyone else wanted to know what went on, but I don't think And I think maybe a lot of it was lost because we did lose the game and it was kind of gone. So I don't know how much was said afterwards. I didn't read anything, didn't want to read anything about it. It was such a difficult situation to go through. And yeah, I think now that I'm kind of old and more experienced, I would quite like to know what the thought process behind the whole thing was. And I don't know if I'll ever know that. I could potentially pick the phone up to Alex and ask him the question, but I've just never really felt that it was my place to do that, because it was his job at the time and it was his decision to make.
What was that duo like, that dynamic of the two boss men? Do you sort of maybe understand why it's never really caught on?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think just exactly what happened to us is why it's never caught on. It's that's such a difficult dynamic to have two managers who have equal responsibility at a club. I just don't think that can ever work. I mean, the thing is, maybe in some businesses it could work, and probably does work in businesses throughout the world, but in football, I think it's too difficult. There's too many coaches have strong opinions, and they're not able to listen too much to someone else when they think they're right. And I think that's a lot to do with sports like that. But it might work in other sports, but in my experience, I think that would be a very difficult thing to achieve.
You've touched upon obviously that 91 season and it fallen second. Obviously that happened I think twice more in your time at Aberdeen, and then there was also a few cup final losses. Do you think in that period of time that Aberdeen side did underachieve?
I don't know. I mean, I think for that Aberdeen side to continue to challenge and to be there and to be in cup finals, and I think that was an achievement in itself. I think we can see that today. You know, when Aberdeen get to the final of a cup, if they're competing to the end of the season where the Old Firm, no matter which side are on top at that particular moment, I think again that's an achievement. But I think that's what sets that whole Ferguson era apart, is that it was Aberdeen that were setting the standards, and it was Rangers and Celtic and anyone else that were trying to compete. I think the game's changed, and I think finances have taken over to a certain degree. So it's seldom seen that a club with reduced finances compared to their competitors actually are able to win. And when it does happen, then it's for certain specific reasons. And we've seen it with Leicester in the English Premiership, and we've seen it with Greece in European Championships at some. So but it's few and far between that you see clubs that do not have the resources that can actually win things, and that wasn't as much the case back in the Fergie era. It was more about getting a team together that believed, with quality obviously and great management, but the resources actually financially it wasn't the top factor within it. And I think things have changed a little bit. So yeah, football moves on, and we just got to go and deal with what comes with it.
no matter what, you were obviously doing something right. And obviously during that time, you get that call up and that selection to Euro '96. What was that emotion like? Obviously, you had an extremely successful under 21 stint with Scotland, and you were picking up the appearances as your time at Aberdeen grew. But obviously, that selection in the '96 squad must have been something.
Yeah, it was. It was. It was England, so everyone wanted to be there, and just the whole thing about. I mean, at that time we had a great squad. We had like really experienced players that had been through it a lot, and we also had some good young players that were coming through as well. So the balance was really good, and and yeah, it was amazing to be part of the squad and to be part of the championships that were based in England. And remember our first game at Aston Villa against Holland, where we arrived there, and it was just like a sea of like tangerine orange, of Holland. I mean, they're fantastic fans, and the irony again as a player back then, not knowing that a few years later I'd actually play in Holland and know those people and their love of the game and stuff. So yeah, it was it was amazing to be part of it, and then of course in '98 to be part of that as well was again fantastic. Um, quite interesting though that obviously the second one I was part of, and I was playing most of my football in Holland by then.
I was going to touch on it later, but we'll just do it now. That move out to Holland, obviously. So you were at Dortmund and then went out to Utrecht. Was that because you had in your mind that you needed game time to be in Craig Brown's squad?
Yeah, exactly. That was the whole point. I'd spoken to Craig, and I wasn't playing at Dortmund. I was on the bench. I was getting minimal time in games, and I asked the question: if I stay here, am I going to be, you know, a serious prospect for getting in your squad? And or if I leave and go on loan, would and I play, obviously much more game time, would that benefit me? And he said, yeah, it would benefit you more to play more games. So immediately I looked to leave Dortmund to go on loan.
You weren't the only one, but there was a increased sort of media attention, obviously, around Ali McCoy's submission from the squad. Did you feel a little bit of pressure, like, right, obviously, am I one of the guys that's maybe taking his spot or something like that? And obviously, the career that McCoy had up until that point for both Rangers and for Scotland, was that little bit of added pressure because there was a little bit of a fury around that he wasn't in that team?
Now, listen, I was growing up. I was a massive Ali McCoy's fan. And that's not what Aberdeen fans want to hear me say, because I equally liked Joe Harper and players like that. But Ali was a goal scorer, and I wanted to be a goal scorer. So I looked at the best goal scorers in my day, and he was 100% one of those by far. So it was just natural for a football player to want to emanate to a player like Coistie's brilliance in the box, because I I didn't score goals from any further out than about 10 or 12 yards. So he was the perfect kind of player for me to look at, to to be better. And yeah, it kind of felt weird that I kind of felt like I took his place in the squad, and obviously I had nowhere near the same level of historical goal scoring that Coisty had, and also not for Scotland. But yeah, it comes a time for any player that they kind of move on. The younger ones come in and they take over. And yeah, timing is everything, and for me, I was just pleased to be able to go and have that experience at that competition.
Timing is everything, and we'll take a little step back just before '98. How does it all come around Dortmund? Obviously Champions League winners, and you're having to leave your boyhood club at the time. Manager's Roy Aitken. Is there a little bit of unrest? Were you wanting out? Were you wanting to go abroad? What was the sort of feeling around that time?
No, I wanted to stay with Aberdeen. There was never a doubt for me. I just wanted to stay until I knew I wasn't wanted in terms of staying. Then everything changed for me. Um, I basically had a meeting with Roy, and there were other clubs that were interested, and yeah, I think the long and the short of it is that he didn't believe that I would go abroad, and it was in those Bosman times where you could leave at the end of your contract, or you could get some money for your club by being sold before your contract ended, so that a club that maybe really wanted you could make sure they got you by paying a fee, and all that thing about fees and stuff, that was all coming to an end because of the Bosman ruling. So yeah, I ended up going to Dortmund on trial. It wasn't where I was due to go on trial. I was due to go to Rapid Vienna. I flew across to Holland to meet um, an agent who was going to take me to Rapid Vienna to sign the contract, and just so happened in the days between actually flying out to Holland and driving through to Vienna, the opportunity to go to Dortmund came up to trial there for 3 or 4 days, and it was with Otmar Hitzfeld, who was the manager at the time, and they were about to go into the Champions League final at the time, or the old Champions League before it was what it is now. And it was a no-brainer. Do you want to go and train with them for 3 or 4 days and see what happens? And yeah, that's what I did. I flew over and we drove to Dortmund and ended up trialing with them for 4 or 5 days. It was like a surreal experience, and then they said, "You don't need to go to Vienna. You can just stay here."
Does the influence of Paul Lambert come into play at all?
Well, Paul was there at the time, yeah, and I ended up being roomie with Paul when I signed. So for the next 6 months, me and Paul were roommates at Dortmund until he left to go to Celtic. And yeah, I mean, I think it was for Dortmund. They probably thought, we've had a Scottish player here that kind of flew under the radar a little bit, and has turned out fantastic for the club. And I think they thought the same might happen for them with me. So, and also, it was good for me and for Paul to have another Scottish-based player in the squad. And yeah, I think ultimately you never know how clubs are thinking, but I signed based on the fact that it was Otmar Hitzfeld that wanted me to stay, and then when I got back after the Champions League final and we started pre-season again, Otmar wasn't there anymore. It was a new head coach, an Italian called Nevio Scala, and everything changed from there.
Does it sort of set the tone from the off then on the bad foot? How does it feel, like you say, obviously the man that signed you wanted you, you maybe feel there's a chance it can be part of his plans, and then it's just sort of like taken all away?
Yeah, that's exactly how it was, really, because Nevio Scala has got a job at a massive club. It's just won the Champions League, and he wants to bring in his own players and put his own stamp on the whole thing. And there was a lot of political things going on at the club at the time, because they had maybe five or six really experienced national team players in the squad that all had opinions on what should happen next for the club. Then, of course, Otmar was moved up to some sort of position on the board. Nebu Scala was brought in, who wanted his own team and to put his own stamp on things. So, although the club was flying high because they just won a massive tournament, they were also in a state of flux with what was going on with them internally, and that was quite similar, really, though, to what was happening at Aberdeen when I left, because we'd lost I think the club had sacked the management team at the time. We'd lost our director of football, I think, to Everton, and a lot of things were going on at the club when I actually, it's just when I left at the very end of my time at Aberdeen, when I eventually went back. So it's just to point out that things happen at clubs internally that players, are sometimes not able to change or make any inroads in, because there's a bigger picture involved. So it happened to me at Dortmund, and it happened to me in my last season at Aberdeen.
When obviously you're at Dortmund and it didn't really work out probably the way that obviously you envisaged it to, what were those loan moves like, especially out to Holland? How much did you enjoy them, like you say, getting back to playing football, doing what you were doing best?
Yeah, I mean, it was great. I kind of felt like I had to go because I wanted to be in the national team, but I also wanted to play, and I think the first loan move to Utrecht was a major catalyst for me, because I loved the Dutch people. You would just across the border, and I had a home in Dortmund, but it wasn't that far away, and I was able to go and sample a new kind of football, and met Mark Votta at that point, who was the head coach at Utrecht, and he became quite influential for me, and loved my time with the players there. Ended up playing with Michael Mols, who was a fantastic striker. Eventually came back to Rangers, and just had a great time for maybe, I think it was something like 5 months or something. Fans were amazing, and thought, it was a nice country to live in. It was very open. The people were amazing. They spoke English, and in the majority they were very welcoming. And I thought, yeah, I enjoyed playing there. So it was a natural process. The next time I decided to leave Dortmund was again to go back to Holland.
When you went to Twente, do you sort of feel that when you're playing over there that you may be going a little bit under the radar here, or are you still, are you out of really the picture for the international setup, or are you just sort of doing your business quite happily though?
I was doing my business quite happily. I knew I was kind of off the radar. I kind of knew that. It didn't really bother me. Obviously, always wanted to play for my country, always. But there's only so much a player can actually do. You can only just do what you do. And I played my best football, probably, I would say my best football regularly was in Holland, over my whole career. And yeah, as you say, kind of flew under the radar, but enjoyed my time with successful teams in Holland, and yeah, loved every minute of being abroad playing. And I've always said that I would recommend it to any player that feels that they have the chance to do it, and that it maybe fits for their situation. Then 100% go and do it. So yeah, I just loved my time with both, well, Utrecht firstly, and then Arnhem, and then after that with Enschede.
So obviously, the really successful time out in Holland, as you said. What was the drive always to come back home though? Were you realising that maybe the end of your career was near, and you wanted to come back and do like a full circle to Aberdeen, or how did it all sort of come around?
No, I never actually thought there was no plan to come back home at all, ever. It just so happened that my contract was up at FC20. There were other clubs in Holland that were interested, and then the phone call came in about Aberdeen, and to be honest, how it sort of came about was we just my first son was just about was just born not long before that, and it kind of that just because of that the sort of timing of it sort of meant, well, we had other things to think about, not just me playing football, but our kids growing up. And I think it definitely put more emphasis on this might be the right time to go back and play. And I wouldn't have wanted to go back to have played for anyone else, and you don't often get the opportunity to go back and play for Aberdeen. So I just thought at that point it was the right thing. I was also thinking at that point, maybe I had a little bit of coaching and thinking about those things, because although I wasn't, I think I was 31, I wasn't old. It was starting to come to the time where I wanted to think about something else after football as well. But came back to Aberdeen with a full intention just to play, and absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. The fans were amazing, really amazing, and I've continued to be that way, right through. So I don't regret for a second coming back, even though it wasn't the most successful seasons. And at the end of that season, that was the end of me playing football.
Was your whole sort of career plagued by injuries?
Probably, I would say when I was in Holland and Germany, not so much. No, I think that was one of the reasons why I enjoyed it so much, playing in Holland and Germany, was that I enjoyed playing in warm conditions. I liked the sun. My body liked the sun. It felt warmed up before we even started, and I had far fewer injuries while playing in Holland and Germany than ever when I played in Scotland. And I think that was a major factor. Yeah, they had cold winters, that's for sure, but the majority of the year it was much warmer, and it just suited me more as a player. I tended to get muscle injuries. I didn't really have any like bone injuries, ankles, knees, whatever. I didn't have any of those. It was just always muscular. So I think the warmer climate really suited me and helped. And it was one of the reasons why I enjoyed my time out there that much, because I played consistently and enjoyed the fact that I felt, fit and healthy as a player. Whereas my time in Scotland was a little bit different. It was great for the time that I was with Aberdeen. I enjoyed every minute, but at the same time, I had a lot of disappointments as well, playing for the club, and a lot of that was down to just wanting to do what I could for the club and to play for the team, but certain things got in the way. And I think as a coach now, you see that in players. You can see there are certain players that do pick up injuries, and and it's harder for them, and you have to try to protect them more, but you also want the best from them because they're maybe your better players, and you want to gain from them as a squad or as a team. But the whole thing in football is a learning process, and I think you undoubtedly, as a player, you just want to play as much as you can, and when you don't play or you can't play, it feels like the world is just not right. That's kind of sometimes detrimental to you, and I think sometimes I got too much on top of myself, and and it didn't help. So now I try with players who maybe do have muscular injuries or don't play as often as they can to help them, relax and make sure that they get the best out of themselves and the club gets the best out of them.
Obviously, you've went into that sort of coaching path, but it never really transpired right after you ended your career. You said you came back to Aberdeen perhaps to pursue that coaching role. Was the idea always to go straight into coaching, or was the punditry and commentary a bit more appealing to you?
No, the year that I left Aberdeen, I was on holiday and took a phone call from Rob McLean, who asked me if I'd like to become a trackside reporter for Setanta. And I had offers from maybe 3 clubs in Scotland, and I was serious about those clubs. And then obviously got the phone call from Rob and decided that this was a chance to go into a different career path. Yeah, it was probably pretty early. There wasn't really the opportunity to continue to play football and do the job, and I had to make a decision. And I was never, I'd gone abroad and done all that. I was never frightened of doing something a bit different. And took the job, and I don't regret it. It was a great move for me. It was a great decision. It 100% opened my eyes to a different side of football and everything else. It was difficult going directly from having played with players and against managers to interviewing them, trackside or after the game or during the week in the build up to another match. But all the same, I loved my time at Setanta.
Can it affect, or perhaps did it affect any of your relationships? As you say, you're speaking to managers who have maybe managed you faced only a year ago, playing with players or against players only a matter of months ago. How does that sort of relationship, does it affect it long term?
Well, I had a few run-ins. Yeah, I had a couple of issues with various coaches. One an Aberdeen manager, one a Rangers manager. Yeah, I mean it's totally different, but again, I always try to do my job as well as I could, and I took on this role, and I understood what the role meant, and I had to ask questions, and I had to have a sort of perspective or point of view on things. So it was a completely different role, and yeah, I absolutely loved it. I really did. I loved it. It was great times, completely great times, and taught me a hell of a lot as a person. To be standing around in the around the boot room at Pataudry before a game to get interviews, or in corridors bumping into players that you played against or managers you'd played against, and just as a sort of trackside reporter skulking around waiting for your opportunity to do what it is that you have to do, which I felt completely uncomfortable about. That part of the job I really did not like, but it was part of the job. So it makes you, see things from different perspectives, I suppose.
What was so lucrative about the Stenhousemuir job that was the one that was like, right, that's going to get me into full time coaching? Obviously, you'd worked with the SFA at the under 15s, under 16s, as you said, with Mark Water. So, what made it though that it was the Stenhousemuir job that thought, right, I can be the number one guy?
Well, I think I'd worked for the SFA for about 2.5 years, doing what I was doing, and I was slowly sort of making my way forward, and I'd had some success there with the various youth setups. But I think my time as a professional football player, and um, just working with adults, I suppose, um, was different from being a youth coach. And also at the SFA, you were tied to having only a certain amount of time with your players, and I just wanted to test out whether I could be a coach on a day-to-day basis. And I think I was naive, completely naive, because I didn't really understand the sort of semi-professional part of the game in Scotland. I'd always been, from the age of 17, Aberdeen, a professional, and I never saw anything else. So it was a little bit different. Like the youth setup with the national teams was different. Although I liked the balance. I liked the balance between having the players for like 10 days or 2 weeks on a tournament, and then a lot of the admin side of it and scouting side of it. I liked all the balance of that. But I think as a coach, you're always looking to be involved as much as you can with your team and with your players. So the opportunity arose, and I thought it was a level that would work for me, and I was probably wrong. It was a level that actually didn't work for me. It was players who were quite happy to be semi-professional, to only train twice a week, and to be to have another really good career on alongside, like either a tradesman or whatever it happened to be. And it was extra money for them, but also they put it in for the football, but not to become a better professional most of the time, not to become more than they actually were. A lot of them were happy to be where they were, and to be at that level, and that's a difficult thing for me. I'm always looking for someone to want to be better and to achieve greater things.
Do you think you found that dynamic then quite hard, that perhaps you were maybe expecting too much of them because, like you say, you've came from, an Aberdeen side, and or if be over in Holland, you've been to a World Cup, you've been to the Euros. You think maybe your expectations were a little bit too high for, perhaps, as you say, guys who just wanted a little bit extra money on the side?
I don't think it was just like they wanted a little bit extra money on the side. I think a lot of them loved playing football, and it was the only way that they could actually play football at the level that they were playing football at, because they already had jobs, and those jobs brought in secure money for their families. And it was just a different dynamic. It was a different thought process. It really wasn't that they'd sort of given up, or they didn't want to, or whatever. It wasn't like that. It was just, for me, I was constantly looking to coach players who I thought would want to go further, and they would want to become like full-time professionals. And I'd always worked with full-time professionals, so it just wasn't an easy dynamic. And it was my first job as a professional coach, as a full-time coach, on the men's side. So yeah, I just don't think it worked. I can also say things like, well, I was told that it was a 2 year, at least a 2 year contract, and the whole point of it was to bring through younger players, and it was going to take time and all this kind of thing. That many managers have said that before about what boards tell them, and it doesn't work out that way. It comes down to results, and it comes down to other dynamics. But that was the reason that I took the job, and it didn't work out that way. But I learned a lot from it. I learned not to not to believe too much about what people tell you when you're getting a job. Ultimately you have to win games, and you have to make players better and make your squad better, and to have a successful club. And I think that's why that whole change from Stenhousemuir, from the Scottish FA, to then moving to the women's side of the game to Glasgow City really benefited me, because it was probably coming at the right time.
I was just going to say, obviously, your Stenhousemuir stint was so short, and quite the opposite. Your Glasgow City reign has been so long and so successful. How does that come around? Were you open minded, obviously, to coaching into the women's game? Was it a little bit frowned upon? Were there worries? Because at that time, obviously, you've really been right at the helm while the progression's really been there, and you've seen it all front line. Now you're seeing highlights are on BBC Scotland channel, and there's coverage so much, but right at the beginning it wasn't quite like that.
No, it wasn't. I think after the demise of Satanta, I started to do like co-commentary on radio for the Beeb, and I was working for ESPN on German games, and Sky on Dutch games down in London. I was doing a lot of that kind of thing, and I was asked by the Beeb to do the Glasgow City Paris Saint-Germain game, which was the first time that the club got to the last eight. Um, and I didn't know any of that at the time. I didn't really know Glasgow City that well at all. I obviously knew of them, but I didn't watch their games or anything. I was asked, would you? It was kind of like, almost in a way, apologetically, would you co-commentate this game on whatever day it was? And I was like, yeah, because again, I don't say no to a new experience or doing something different. I just think it's always, you try it and see how it goes. So went along and did the game, and they struggled against PSG, but uh, yeah, the irony of the whole thing is that, like, I think it was about 3 months later I had the job at Glasgow City, which, if you'd asked me when I was actually sitting down doing the commentary that day, I'd have gone, that's never going to happen. So it just shows you how football can go.
Like I say, obviously, we said that you were really right there at the beginning of this sort of whole development, really, of the women's game up here in Scotland. Obviously, it's been going on for such a long time, but it's really kicked off in these last few years. What was it like managing the women like Julie Fleeton, and like that legends like
Easy.
Gemma Fay? Exactly, like you're going from perhaps Stenhousemuir. We're talking about guys who are part time, and then you're going to 200 odd caps Gemma Fay, and 100 odd caps and 100 odd goals Julie Fleet. And what's it like to work with those sort of women?
Yeah, I mean, I think, without being sort of too sentimental, that's been the biggest privilege of coaching at Glasgow City, as those players, and I still have them. With Lero and Kreitz and Joe Love and Hayley Lauder and Lee Alexander. I'm lucky, and I've always felt lucky that we've had these players. It's always been something for me to fall back on, and to have them as part of the group. And sometimes they're not easy, because they're strong-willed, and they have their own opinions. But generally, across the piece, they've been so important for me as a coach. Coming from the men's side of the game into the women's side, and over a fantastic period where the women's game in Scotland has grown hugely.
Obviously, the dominance has been there for Glasgow City. There's always been a really competitive Hibs side, but you see now Celtic and Rangers, and a lot more money's being invested, and the clubs really are trying to push for it. How great is that to see from a front row seat?
Yeah, I mean, I think it will, and it is really benefiting women's football in Scotland. That's for sure. And the competitive edge is massive. I mean, any sport any sport needs to be competitive in order for people to want to watch it. And I welcome it, and I always have done. And I think that it's going to continue to grow over the years. I don't see women's football going anywhere else now. You know, in terms of not just Scotland, but I mean Europe and the world. It's just a growing sport. It's finding its place, which is good because it deserves it. And I really feel like I've been part of a period in women's football in Scotland that has shown growth and has moved forward, which is fantastic.
And obviously, right at the centre of that have been the European runs that really Glasgow City have went on more than anyone. What are those sort of games like your PSGs, your Bayern Munichs? What's that like?
Yeah, they're the sort of the bonding moments, aren't they? They're the ones that the players remember, and the group remembers that they were there and what happened. And they've played against Barcelona, they've played against like Wolfsburgs, and the I think for Glasgow City, because they've been involved in the Champions League for so long, and they've been able to work with the Champions League and the domestic campaign hand in hand for so long, it's become a necessity that the club is involved with the Champions League and European football, because it's become so much part of what the club is about and what the players want to come to the club for and what they expect to experience. So, yeah, I mean, it's been no different for me and my time at the club. The European experiences have been fantastic. I mean, any time you can get away abroad with the players and you're there as a group, because it's different in the women's game, or it certainly has been for the majority and still is for the majority in the women's game, is that you very rarely actually have a dressing room that you all meet up in, and you become not just a team, and without being over dramatic, sort of like a family within that dressing room. And it is the case. You spend a lot of time with your teammates in that kind of environment. But in the women's game in Scotland, that's not really ever been the case. It might be starting to happen now, but it hasn't been. And so trips away, those 5 days, maybe even a week away, where you're like living with each other and you get a chance to really bond. That experience is so important, and I think that's why at City over the last 6 years I've been lucky. We've had many of those sort of times to be able to do that, and I think that's really helped us as a team and as a club get through those moments where it's you have to win here to win the league, or you have to win here to win the cup, or you have to win here to progress in the Champions League. And I think that togetherness is so important.
Obviously, you said at the top of the show we have caught you on a day after a win, thank goodness. So it's been not too bad. What are the aims for the season, and how delighted are you? Obviously, again, just to reiterate, obviously that's the season as we're recording. It's not long back up started, and it's just great to be back, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing to be back. Mostly really because you can as a coach, you want the players to be excited, to be up, to be ready, to be focused, to be driven. And there's only really one thing that gets players like that, and that's a match day coming up. Without those match days, it's very difficult to recreate that. So that's not been difficult over the last few weeks. It's been great. The players are ready. We've got a fantastic squad of real quality players that come from all over the world and have come together to try and achieve a very great thing, and which would be to win the league title yet again. So yeah, I mean the last few weeks have been fantastic. I really enjoyed training, watching the girls train and become a real tight unit. And yeah, long may that continue.
Absolutely, Scott. And all that's really left to say is obviously all the best for the rest of the season. And thanks so much for joining me on Soccer Supernova.
I've really enjoyed it. Thanks very much. You've definitely had some great questions there.
Cheers, Scott. Thanks very much. All the best.